Welcome to this story, one of the most unsettling cases ever noted in Nevada. Before we dive in, share in the comments where you're tuning in from and the exact time you started listening. It's always interesting to see the different places and hours of the day or night where these stories reach. Let's begin. Late in the summer of 1889, the town of Redstone Creek in Nevada lay under a heavy, still air. The sun had begun its descent behind distant ridges of sage and granite, casting long shadows across the wooden storefronts. At the edge of town, the newly appointed Marshal, Deputy Marshal Benjamin Ben Trask, arrived by a rattling stagecoach. He stepped off into a silence broken only by the faint whinny of a tied horse and the creaking boards of a porch. His purpose was simple: to uphold the law in a territory still wild, to serve and protect in a place shaped by the mineral rush and desert fortunes described in the broader history of Nevada. Wikipedia Trask was a man of 32, lean, weather-tanned, and carrying the weight of frontier responsibility on broad shoulders. His badge glinted under late-day light, and he wore a long, dust-coated coat, boots that had tracked thousands of dusty miles, and a brimmed hat pulled low. Locals found him courteous but reserved. The leading merchant, one Edward Harrigan, later described him as a calm man with eyes that see too much. In the county clerk's ledger, his appointment was brief but formal. B. Trask sworn 14th of August 1889, by Justice of the Peace J. W. Collins. Soon after he arrived, whispers began to drift through saloons and board-up rooms, odd footsteps behind locked doors, caretakers hearing muffled voices in the cellar, the stray dog of the town awakening suddenly, only to vanish beyond town limits. Nevada's boomtown era had brought prosperity and reckless lawlessness in equal measure. From the boom of silver and mining camps to the isolated herds on open ranges, the backdrop was one of struggle, ambition, and rapid change. Wikipedia Trask's goal was straightforward: to tame disorder, to investigate thefts of livestock, stagecoach holdups, and to enforce the law even where the line between outlaw and citizen was blurred. But from the outset, his papers reported a case with no clear suspect, no clear motive, and soon no clear marshal. By late September, the townsfolk had grown uneasy. It was during one such evening, as the sky cooled and the saloon doors swung shut, that Marshal Trask undertook his first patrol alone. The boardwalk creaked, wind stirred the abandoned minecarts behind town, and the moon, rising pale, cast ghost-like shapes into empty windows. He passed the stables, paused at the edge of town where the sagebrush began, and then heard it: a distant, far-off cough, then a faint groan. Approaching the stable, he found no one. The tied horse was calm, its saddle neatly in place, but the door to the hayloft was ajar. Inside, footprints in fresh dust led into darkness. He opened the door, lantern in hand, and found nothing but stale air and a single leather glove on the floor. The glove bore his own initial BT loosely scratched on the cuff, a detail the clerk later recorded in his notebook. That glove would mark the beginning of the vanished Marshal mystery. Trask returned to the town's modest jail room, placed the glove upon the small oak desk, and locked the door behind him. He made a brief note: "Investigation begins, unknown footprints. Glove identified," and signed it B. Trask, Marshal. No one else saw the glove's origin, and no suspect emerged. Yet the town's peace had taken on a brittle edge. Locals began to talk. "He's seen something," said one bartender. "Something that won't let him sleep." The record from Clerk Collins noted this under miscellaneous disturbances, September 28, 1889. In that first week, nothing dramatic followed. No bodies, no gunfire, no chase. But the underlying tension grew. Townsmen exchanged glances when the streetlights flickered off at dusk. The stray dog, which had been seen earlier with Trask, stopped appearing entirely. And though the broader history of Nevada included countless tales of vanished miners and ghost towns, a lawman disappearing would carve a different legacy into the frontier record. By the first week of October 1889, Redstone Creek had taken on a restive silence. The silver operations in nearby hills slowed, and a lingering unease filled the town's only boarding house. Mrs. Clara Winslet, its keeper, told later inquiry officers that Marshal Trask had begun keeping irregular hours, walking out near midnight, whispering notes into his ledger, sometimes staring toward the ridge as though waiting on somebody. Her account survives in the partially burned Humboldt County record, its margins singed, but the words intact enough to hint at the Marshal's growing preoccupation. One notable entry from his journal, preserved by the clerk's office, read, "Voices near the creek again. Not wind, too measured, too human. Need to verify if miners remain past curfew." Whether these were the echoing voices of workers or something more imagined, no one could determine. What is known, drawn from fragments and affidavits later reprinted alongside the regional events chronicled in the history of Nevada, is that many small towns in that decade wrestled with lawmen overwhelmed by isolation and superstition. The wide distances, the flickering lamplight, and the echo of coyotes created conditions where even a steady mind might bend under the strain. Around the same time, the blacksmith, Jonas Merrill, recalled seeing Trask at dawn, hat off, coat slung over his arm, eyes bloodshot, as he studied the tracks near the old assay office. "He said something about a man walking barefoot in the frost," Merrill testified. "But there weren't no such tracks when I looked after." Two other witnesses described a faint humming from the gulch. One miner claimed it was only wind through empty shafts, yet the pattern repeated nightly. By mid-October, a deputy from Carson City, Arthur Keene, arrived to deliver tax records. Finding the marshal absent, he took it upon himself to inspect the small jail and desk. The glove remained folded carefully in a drawer. A few notes followed, cryptic in phrasing. "Do not trust the ridge lights, different hue, same hour. Must check again when moonful." Keene mentioned this later in testimony to the county commission. What caught his attention more, however, was the faint smell of oil and dust, as though the lantern had burned all night with no watcher. The following evening, townsfolk gathered near the general store. A mild storm brewed, bringing distant thunder and metallic air. Mr. Harrigan, the merchant, claimed to have seen a figure moving behind the old mill, lantern swaying. Thinking it was Trask, he called out, but the figure made no reply. Only when the lightning struck did he realize the silhouette was too tall, the hat too wide, and the movement wrong. Stiff, deliberate, almost mechanical. The newspaper Territorial Gazette printed a brief note. "Marshal B. Trask unaccounted for as of October 14th, last known to patrol mill region at dusk." The article ended with the usual assurance that investigation was underway, though later analysts, including those referencing the period summaries in the history of Nevada, remarked how such disappearances were often filed away with minimal follow-up in remote districts. Within days, Redstone Creek locked its doors earlier, and the saloons ceased music after sundown. The townspeople whispered that the marshal's badge still glinted somewhere in the brush, catching moonlight before fading again into shadow. The search for Marshal Trask began formally on the morning of October 15, 1889, when Justice J.W. Collins assembled a group of 6 volunteers to comb the outskirts of Redstone Creek. They moved along the dried riverbed, through mesquite scrub, and toward the foothills where the abandoned mining adits dotted the landscape like open wounds. Each man carried a lantern and a length of rope, the usual gear for recovery rather than rescue. Their accounts, taken later in signed depositions, mention that the wind rose suddenly after sunrise, carrying a low metallic hum that none could trace. By midday they found the first sign, boot prints that led into the narrow shaft of Eagle Bend Mine No. 2, a site shuttered since 1884 after a collapse claimed 3 lives. Inside the shaft, air was heavy with dust. Collins ordered only 2 men to enter, one of them Jonas Merrill, the blacksmith. The tunnel bent left, then opened into a chamber half filled with broken timbers. There they discovered a torn page from the marshal's notebook. Sound returns different below, record after next visit. No body, no hat, and no trace of struggle were found. When the team emerged, Collins marked the site with a wooden stake and closed it again, fearing another cave-in. That note, preserved in the county archive, became the last verified object linked to Benjamin Trask. For days, reports came in from neighboring towns, sightings of a man matching the marshal's description, walking along the rail track near Wadsworth, or boarding a freight wagon east of Virginia City. Yet each claim dissolved upon inspection. One prospector swore he'd seen Trask carrying a lantern by the Carson River at midnight, the reflection casting twin lights across the current. Another miner insisted it was only the will-o'-the-wisp, the same old trick of gases from the water. Such testimony, however unreliable, entered the county files under miscellaneous sightings. Midway through the investigation, a traveling correspondent for the Territorial Gazette, Thomas Reeve, arrived to document the affair. He wrote that Redstone Creek felt haunted not by ghosts, but by the weight of unspoken knowledge. His article, though sensational, provides a useful timeline and cross-references other frontier vanishings mentioned in the history of Nevada, where record-keeping often faltered during the mining downturns of the 1880s. Reeve noted how officials, lacking telegraph lines for several days, relied on riders to send dispatches, many of which never reached the state seat. By the end of October, the official search was reduced to 2 men, both deputized by Collins. They canvassed nearby ranches, interviewing drovers and shepherds. One shepherd, an elderly Basque named Esteban Urdi, described seeing a coat hanging from a branch, swaying though there was no wind. When deputies followed his direction, they found only a shred of leather and a rusted buckle. No initials, no blood, no evidence of violence. The mystery deepened not by discovery, but by the void it left behind. As autumn pressed colder, families began leaving town, claiming the mines were finished and the soil spoiled. By the year's end, only 30 residents remained. Redstone's postmaster submitted his final report, closing with the remark, "Marshal's desk untouched." Glove returned to evidence chest. That chest, later found warped by moisture, contained nothing but the glove and a cracked photograph plate showing Trask standing with miners months before his disappearance. A photograph whose image, even then, seemed to fade at the edges as though erasing itself. By early November 1889, Redstone Creek existed more as a rumor than a town. The telegraph office had gone silent after its lone operator moved east, and the last functioning establishment, a supply store run by Eleanor Harrigan, sister of the merchant, kept its doors bolted except on market days. The disappearance of Marshal Trask had infected every conversation with superstition. Men who once dismissed folklore now spoke of lights flickering across the ridge, of bootsteps heard on porches when the street lay empty. The Territorial Gazette printed a second, more speculative column under the heading, "Marshal Trask Still Missing, the Desert Keeps Its Secrets." Justice Collins, compelled by the county's request, reopened the investigation, though with dwindling manpower. He called upon Dr. Luther Baines, a physician from Tonopah, to examine the marshal's quarters for signs of illness or self-harm. Baines found the small jail room in perfect order, ledger open, pen neatly laid across the last entry. Dust had settled evenly, suggesting no one had entered for days. The oil lamp's wick was half burned and dry. In his report, Baines wrote, "No sign of mania, but the air held an unaccountable metallic scent, like iron filings warmed by flame." The note was filed under Medical Annex, 3rd November 1889. From the perspective of later researchers, particularly those studying the boom and bust isolation described in the history of Nevada, Trask's case fit a disturbing pattern. Lawmen stationed in remote settlements often vanished or abandoned their posts without official discharge, leaving behind tools, uniforms, and paperwork as though stepping out for a brief walk. Frontier bureaucracy rarely followed through, especially during fiscal shortages. Still, what set Trask apart was the precision of his record-keeping up to the moment of disappearance, implying intent rather than flight. That same week, blacksmith Jonas Merrill claimed to have heard knocking from beneath his workshop floor. 3 steady raps, repeated twice, then silence. When he pried up a plank the next morning, he found only compact earth and a thin layer of water seeping upward. The incident frightened him enough to close shop and move to Reno, leaving behind an affidavit stating, "The sound was like hammering in a coffin." Others dismissed it as settling beams or rodents, yet the description echoed the miners' superstitions surrounding the sealed shafts of Eagle Bend. On November 10th, heavy rain washed through the gulch, unearthing fragments of rotted timber near the mine entrance. A passing freight driver noticed something glinting amid the mud, what appeared to be a brass fastening. When retrieved, it proved to be half of a lawman's belt buckle, bent inward as if pressed by great weight. The initials BT were faintly visible. Justice Collins ordered the mine reopened temporarily, but flooding prevented further entry. Witnesses described the water inside as dark, with an oily sheen that reflected their lantern light in distorted rings. By the close of that month, rumors grew beyond control. Some swore they saw a figure matching the marshal's build, walking along the ridgeline at dusk. Others heard his voice calling names unfamiliar to any resident. The remaining townsfolk began leaving offerings, coins, bits of cloth, even tobacco at the edge of the dry creek, muttering prayers for the one who kept watch. Redstone Creek's nights stretched longer, the cold sharper, and by early winter silence reclaimed the streets entirely. Winter of 1889 pressed hard upon Redstone Creek, turning the sand into frozen ridges and sealing the abandoned mine entrances beneath crusts of ice. Only a handful of residents remained: the Harrigan siblings, Justice Collins, Dr. Baines, and a quiet ranch couple, the Pratts, whose property bordered the old rail spur. The cold, though ordinary for Nevada's high country, seemed sharper that season, biting through walls and skin alike. In early December, Collins received word that new county officials intended to close Redstone's precinct altogether. Before handing over the keys, he resolved to inventory every record concerning Marshal Trask. Inside the marshal's office, he found the oak desk swollen with damp, its drawer stiff from warping. When pried open, a second page from Trask's notebook emerged, creased, water-stained, but legible. It read, "Ridge light seen again, steady flame, not lantern. Heard breathing behind me. Turned, nothing there. Continue patrol at same hour tomorrow." Collins signed a memorandum noting the discovery, but curiously the date he entered was November 11th, a full day before the flood had blocked the mine. Historians referencing similar anomalies in the history of Nevada have since observed how clerks in remote counties often misdated entries, either from fatigue or the confusion of overlapping reports. Yet in this case, Collins was known for precision. That evening, Eleanor Harrigan, who managed the store, heard tapping on her rear door long after closing. When she opened it, no one stood outside. Only a set of prints, barefoot, narrow, and leading away toward the creek, remained in the frost. She summoned her brother, who followed the trail a short distance until it vanished among willows. In the morning light, the marks appeared fresh again, as though made moments earlier. A penciled account of this event still survives among the clerk's unsorted papers, its edges singed by later fire. A week later, Dr. Baines departed for Tonopah, leaving Collins the only remaining official in town. Before leaving, the doctor recorded a curious observation. "In the night since the marshal vanished, I hear hoofbeats near my window, though no stable stands nearby. The sound halts whenever I light a lamp." He attributed it to nerves. But the description matches others collected decades later from families passing through the ruins, details eerily consistent in spacing and rhythm. By Christmas Eve, Redstone Creek was almost deserted. The Pratts packed for Reno, abandoning their livestock. Collins alone remained, sleeping in the old jail. His final correspondence, mailed December 26, stated, "Will secure records, leave by New Year." But he never left. A delivery driver arriving January 4, 1890, found the jail door ajar. Snow drifted across the threshold. Inside, the oil lamp was burned out, the glove still upon the desk, and a single new line inked below Trask's last entry: "Patrol complete." Authorities from Virginia City later sealed the building and relocated the files, noting in their report that all items were accounted for excepting the marshal's badge, which remains missing. The badge's absence would persist through every later inquiry, inspiring folkloric claims that its reflection could still be glimpsed along the creek on moonless nights. When investigators from Virginia City finally arrived in late January 1890, they found Redstone Creek half buried in snow and eerily intact, as if time itself had stopped after Collins's final note. Deputy Inspector Samuel Roth led the three-man team that examined the jailhouse and surrounding area. Their report, now fragmented in the Washoe County archives, states plainly, "No sign of forced entry. No indication of theft or struggle. Premises appear maintained until recent." The ink on Collins' last line, "Patrol complete," was barely dry. Every object, from the oil lamp to the folded coat, seemed preserved in careful order. Roth's men searched the Eagle Bend shaft again, carrying pumps to drain the standing water. They discovered only silt and timbers, along with one brass cartridge casing embedded in mud. Whether fired by Trask or another, no one could say. The cartridge's date stamp matched 1888 production from a Reno supplier. Roth's journal notes, Single discharge in confined space, no echo reported. He found that detail curious enough to underline twice. His findings were forwarded to the county seat, but no further investigation was authorized. The mining region's decline had already made Redstone Creek economically irrelevant. Meanwhile, the few who lingered near the valley began reporting strange atmospheric changes. Freight riders spoke of a persistent fog that formed at dusk regardless of temperature. One drover claimed it rose like smoke from under the ground, while such phenomena were later attributed to mineral gases, similar to those described in geological sections of the History of Nevada. The accounts at the time took on darker tones. A diary from a traveling salesman passing through the area in February 1890 describes the town as vacant, save for the echo of boots on boards. In March, Redstone Creek's post office was officially struck from the register. The remaining structures, 2 saloons, a storehouse, and the jail, were left to weather and dust. Yet a passing surveyor named George Kemp swore under oath that he met a man on horseback near the ridge, wearing a lawman's coat with tarnished badge. He asked the road to Carson, Kemp testified, but when I turned to point, he was gone. His statement was filed but marked unverified. Throughout the 1890s, the legend of Marshal Trask evolved into tavern lore. Ranch hands repeated it over campfires. Itinerant miners wove it into cautionary tales about staying too long in dying towns. A 1901 pamphlet printed in Reno's Frontier Review mentioned a lawman swallowed by his own jurisdiction, likely referencing the same event. Historians now see in these retellings the merging of fact and myth typical of Nevada's post-rush decline, a process well outlined by scholars studying period folklore through the history of Nevada. By 1905, only ruins marked the site. Travelers reported seeing bits of glass and a warped iron safe half buried in silt. One expedition recovered a fragment of the Marshal's ledger binding, its spine blackened by age, pages fused together. The remaining ink was illegible, except for 2 words impressed deeply enough to survive erosion. Still watch. Whether penned by Trask or another hand, no one could prove. Those who camped nearby spoke of hearing hoofbeats echo through the ravine after midnight, steady, deliberate, never approaching, never retreating. It was said that when dawn came, a single line of footprints would appear fresh across the frost, circling the collapsed jail, and vanish at the edge of the dry creek bed. By 1907, the ghost of Redstone Creek had become a feature of frontier rumor, attracting journalists, treasure seekers, and a few wandering academics. Among them was Professor Edwin Mallory, a historian from the fledgling University of Nevada, who visited that spring while compiling notes on post-mining settlements. His later correspondence, preserved in the university's special collections, described the site as eerily undisturbed, save by the desert itself. Mallory spent 2 nights camped near the collapsed mine and recorded a series of observations, changes in air pressure, the faint odor of oil, and what he termed a rhythmic creaking like boots upon boards, though the boards have long since rotted. He was the first to approach the case with an academic tone rather than sensationalism. Mallory's letters reference earlier county documents and the article's summaries already cited in the History of Nevada, where Redstone Creek is listed briefly among settlements lost to economic attrition. Yet his private notes reveal fascination less with economics than with psychology. He hypothesized that Marshal Trask may have suffered from isolation-induced delusion, wandering into the mine after believing himself summoned by voices, an ailment later defined as frontier melancholia. Still, Mallory admitted unease. He found no evidence of a body, nor any trace animals might have disturbed. Something deliberate governed the disappearance, he wrote, an order, not a chaos. While he camped, Mallory encountered a shepherd traveling north who claimed to pass the site yearly. The man recounted seeing a dim glow across the creek each late March, like a watchman's lamp swinging in the dark. He added that coyotes refused to cross that patch of earth, circling wide as if deterred by scent. Mallory, skeptical yet polite, recorded the detail in his field log. That same night, his horse broke its tether and fled downslope, found at dawn a mile away, shaking but uninjured. When the professor departed, he collected minor relics: a door hinge, a nail, and a broken lamp glass etched faintly with initials that could have read BT or RT depending on the angle. He sealed them in paper and sent them to Carson City for cataloguing. Though the inventory vanished in a later archive fire around 1912, his article draft, discovered decades later, stops mid-sentence after describing his final evening. Wind rose after midnight. Rhythmic sound resumed. Could swear I saw outline of a man beyond the fence. Hat brim low, arm lifted slightly as if to hail. Then gone. Folklore evolved accordingly. Travelers began referring to the figure as the Watch Marshal, a restless guardian whose patrol never ended. Children in nearby towns were warned not to wander after dark, lest the lawman of Redstone ask your name. These tales, though distorted, preserved fragments of the original incident long after records decayed. Scholars note that such persistence, fact shifting into fable while names remain intact, is a pattern repeated throughout the mining belt's cultural memory, as noted in later appendices to the history of Nevada. By 1910, Redstone Creek was no longer marked on official maps. The last photograph, taken by a postal surveyor, shows nothing but the faint outline of the jail's doorway and a leaning sign half swallowed by sand. Yet local ranchers swore that on clear nights, if one rode close enough to the ridge, the echo of a slow, measured walk could still be heard. Boots on phantom boards, each step fading, then beginning again. By 1912, Redstone Creek was a name more spoken than seen, kept alive only in letters and recollections. The region had entered a new phase of quiet, long past the silver rush, with railroads slicing through other valleys, leaving this one forgotten. Yet curiosity persisted. That summer, a government cartographer named Lucian Redd was tasked with updating land boundaries and mineral rights around the abandoned district. His field diary, discovered later in Carson's survey office, devotes 10 pages to Redstone. In tidy cursive, he wrote, "Arrived June 14th, town entirely vanished, save for foundations. Air unnaturally still. Heard what I thought was hammering near the creek, though none reside within 20 miles. Redd's entries show the measured eye of an engineer, not a storyteller." He described compass readings that fluctuated wildly near the old jail ruins, the needle trembling toward the collapsed ridge. He tested his instrument 3 times, each result different. In his margin he added, "Possible mineral interference, iron content." Modern geologists studying those same accounts, as referenced in the history of Nevada, noted that magnetic disturbances did occur in former mining zones, though rarely so localized. To Redd, the anomaly seemed personal. He mentioned dreaming that night of a man pacing behind my tent, boots scraping gravel, only to find no prints come morning. Locals in nearby Fallon later recounted meeting Redd at the depot 2 days after his survey. He reportedly looked pale, refused to sleep, and muttered that someone else was walking my route. When pressed, he said only, "It was the Marshal." He never stopped. His final map submission included a faint penciled note along the creek bend. "Area unstable. Best avoided." Around that time, newspaper features revisited the Trask case as nostalgia for the frontier grew. The Tonopah Courier published a retrospective titled "Law and Dust: The Men Who Vanished Upholding Order." It listed several missing officers, among them Benjamin Trask, and referenced the enduring mystery of Redstone Creek. The editor cited Mallory's earlier letters and summarized his psychological theory, but also included the folk version, Trask's ghost patrolling an invisible line between duty and death. Readers sent in their own accounts, claiming kin who had passed near the place and heard the sound of a closing door in open air. By 1914, a small archaeological society from Reno attempted to excavate the Eagle Bend mine's surface layer. They uncovered fragments of lantern glass, a rusted spur, and a length of chain. But the moment their crew reached what they believed to be a collapsed tunnel mouth, one worker collapsed from gas inhalation. His partner swore the man cried out, "He's still down here," before fainting. The society halted operations immediately. Their report ended tersely. Site conditions unsafe for continued study. The documents were filed away, their relevance dwindling as war and new industries reshaped Nevada's priorities. Yet in remote archives, Redstone's folder remained, gathering dust, until a curator decades later noticed faint fingerprints along its cover, smeared traces of graphite as though someone had recently handled it. The curator dismissed it as residue from sorting, but a colleague remarked that the print seemed old, impressed deep into the paper, and aligned in a pattern resembling the letters BT. Thus, even as the state grew modern, paved and bright, a pocket of unease endured in one forgotten gulch. The miners' descendants spoke of avoiding that corridor, claiming watches stopped ticking there and horses refused to cross. Whether coincidence or curse, Redstone Creek held its silence, and the lawman's final patrol, it seemed, had never quite ended. The following spring in 1915, a group of railway surveyors was dispatched to consider a spur route that might pass within a few miles of Redstone Creek. Among them was engineer William Dorsey, a pragmatic man who distrusted legends. His field journal, now held in the Nevada State Museum, contains a plain entry dated April 3rd. Camped near defunct settlement markers. Ground uneven, subsidence evident. Heard metallic tapping during the night. Regular interval, 12 counts. The entry appears calm, but a later annotation, added in different ink, reads simply, "No explanation." Dorsey's team spent 3 nights there mapping terrain. On the second night, they reported the disappearance of a laborer named Henry Klein. Klein had been assigned to collect water from the creek bed. His tracks led a few yards beyond the bank and stopped abruptly as if he'd stepped into thin air. A full search revealed nothing. No footprints beyond, no drag marks, no possessions. By morning, Klein returned, dazed, claiming he'd followed a light and awoke lying beside the old mine timbers. His story was dismissed as exhaustion, yet his hands were blackened with a fine dust none could identify. Samples sent to Carson's geology office were lost in transit. The company doctor accompanying the survey noted mild hysteria among the crew afterward. Men refused to camp near the ridge, insisting they heard someone pacing after dusk. Dorsey, determined to maintain order, moved the camp 2 miles north. Still, according to his log, the noise followed. Booted steps on gravel matching our tempo until halt, then silence. Though the official report omitted these lines, they survived in Dorsey's personal notebook, later donated by his descendants. Around this same year, folklorists such as Edgar Lefebvre began cataloguing regional ghost accounts. In his 1916 essay, Frontier Echoes, he cites Redstone Creek as the purest specimen of the lawman legend, an apparition, bound by duty rather than vengeance. He credits details of the case to the academic, groundwork laid by Mallory and notes parallels, to other accounts documented in the history of Nevada, where frontier officials often became myth after disappearing into harsh landscapes. Lefebvre's treatment gave the story new scholarly legitimacy, ensuring its place among Nevada's darker folk tales. By autumn, the railway project was abandoned. The cost of rerouting through unstable terrain outweighed potential gains. Yet correspondence between Dorsey and the company superintendent shows the engineer's lingering unease. In one letter he writes, "We left the site untouched, yet each man swore he heard the sound of a badge striking stone." He closes with the remark, "I can draw every contour of that valley, but I could not tell you what lies beneath." As the decade drew to a close, Redstone Creek slipped again into obscurity. Nature reclaimed what little remained. Sand swallowed fences, scrub overtook the creek bed, and the last telegraph pole toppled into the dust. But travelers continued to whisper of that place, of a faint rhythmic clink echoing at night, like a belt buckle brushing rock. Some said the sound grew fainter each year, others that it shifted with the wind, tracing a circular path. Whether it was the memory of boots, the settling of old timbers, or the echo of something unfinished, no one ever proved. The official records ended, but the mystery endured. Quiet, steady, unbroken, just as it had begun under the weight of Nevada's endless sky. By 1917, the story of Redstone Creek had entered a twilight space between documented history and frontier myth. The state archives listed it briefly in a ledger of dissolved townships, no population recorded. Yet that same year, a correspondence surfaced from Captain Owen Latham, a retired officer of the Nevada State Police, who visited the ruins while tracing early law enforcement routes. His letter to the commissioner survives in faded ink. The remains of Redstone are precisely as described, but the air bears a strange pressure, as though one stands inside a bell about to toll. Latham's notes show meticulous attention to measurement. He recorded barometric changes, temperature fluctuations, even the rate of his own pulse. At exactly midnight, his readings dropped unnaturally. He wrote, "Wind ceased, then faint sound, metal upon stone, deliberate rhythm." Counted 6 intervals before stopping. Latham was no believer in hauntings. His precision gave the account weight. When he returned to Carson, he submitted a full report, though superiors deemed it extraneous to active duty. The file was misfiled under atmospheric observations and forgotten for decades. Meanwhile, academic interest flickered again. Professor Mallory's unpublished letters were re-examined by graduate students at the University of Nevada, who noticed the overlap between his psychological analysis and newer ideas about sensory distortion in isolation. One of these researchers, Clara Doyle, compared Trask's case to similar disappearances catalogued in the history of Nevada, particularly those involving marshals in remote mining outposts. Her paper, read at a small Reno symposium in late 1917, argued that social withdrawal under prolonged duty may have created conditions mistaken for the supernatural. Yet even Doyle conceded unease. The Redstone files contain consistent auditory details across independent witnesses, too regular for mere hysteria. That winter, a passing freight crew reported seeing flickers of lamplight in the abandoned valley. The foreman, Elias Kern, recorded it in his train log. Light stationary at first, then moved parallel to track for 30 yards before vanishing uphill. He assumed it to be poachers or drifters, but when railroad deputies inspected the next day, the ground was smooth. No footprints, no ashes, no oil residue. By early 1918, Nevada was preoccupied with national matters, and Redstone Creek faded once again into silence. But among locals, the legend had matured. Old men at depot cafes spoke of the Marshal, who never ended his patrol, his boots still tracing the same arc from the creek to the mine. Parents warned their children that to whistle after dark near dry gullies was to call the watchman. Each telling grew leaner, more factual, as if history itself had absorbed the myth until it no longer seemed a story, but a record half erased. In a state archive box labeled Redstone Miscellaneous, 1889-1918, the final sheet of Collins' original docket remains. On its reverse, a later hand, identity unknown, has written in faint pencil, "Badge found near ridge. Returned to place." No official notation confirms this act, but the handwriting appears old-fashioned, the pressure firm, the graphite uneven as if applied by a trembling hand. When the archivist who discovered it decades later lifted the sheet, the outline of that writing had imprinted faintly onto the paper beneath, repeating itself like an echo. She turned off the lamp, closed the file, and noted in her log only 6 words. Document carries smell of oil smoke. The year 1919 brought with it the closing of an era, the last of the frontiermen, the end of horseback patrols, the first murmurs of automobiles replacing wagons. Yet in dusty corners of Nevada's archives, one unsolved case still lingered. That spring, archivist Harold Dempsey, recently appointed to catalog rural precinct documents, stumbled upon the Redstone Creek file. He later recalled the folder smelled faintly of soot and old metal. Inside were the familiar reports, Collins's statements, Trask's scattered notes, a brittle map, and the page marked "Badge found near ridge." Dempsey's curiosity led him to visit the site himself in early May. He traveled by motorcar as far as the Valley Road, then on horseback for the remaining stretch. In his travel diary, discovered among his papers decades later, he described an unnerving calm. No birds. Air heavy yet clear. Ground carries sound. Each hoofbeat echoed twice. He pitched a small tent near the collapsed mine and spent the night transcribing notes by lamplight. Around midnight, he heard the rhythmic clink of metal striking stone, measured, deliberate. It resembled the cadence of footsteps, he wrote. He ventured out with his lantern but saw only the ridge, faintly silver under the moon. The next morning, Dempsey unearthed a corroded belt plate, half buried near the creek bed. It bore no initials this time, only the outline of an insignia worn smooth by sand. He packed it carefully and delivered it to Carson on May 18th. The inventory tag identifies it as unconfirmed Marshal's buckle, source Redstone Creek. Though he planned to return, Dempsey died later that year of pneumonia, leaving no further notes. The buckle remains in museum storage, its origin still disputed. In the years following, References to the incident appeared sporadically. The Nevada Historical Quarterly published a short column in 1921 linking Trask's disappearance to similar accounts of isolated lawmen chronicled in the history of Nevada. Observing that the state's earliest officers operated amid vast, unlit expanses where duty outlasted reason, the article framed Trask's case not as ghost law but as a reflection of psychological endurance, the peril of solitude faced by those sworn to order in lawless territories. Still, stories outpaced scholarship. Freight drivers swore that lamps dimmed when passing the ridge, and more than one traveler claimed to hear a man's voice murmuring a roll call from the dark. A rancher named Silas Horn wrote to the Tonopah Courier in 1922, describing a stranger in a long coat who appeared beside his wagon one night, asked the direction to Carson, then vanished when he turned to answer. The editor filed it as unverified folklore, but locals recognized the description immediately. By 1925, the state began modernizing its highways, erasing many of the old trails that had once wound through Redstone Valley. Bulldozers cut through sage and shale, yet crews refused to work past dusk. Foreman reports mentioned tools misplaced, tents found open, and the occasional scent of burning oil drifting on windless nights. Supervisors blamed exhaustion and desert mirages, but one note in the project ledger stands apart. Crew insists hearing boots pacing near creek. Reassured, no personnel unaccounted for. When construction finally bypassed the valley, the rumor died down once more. Yet each engineer, when asked later, could recall the exact feeling of that place, the hollow air, the stillness, and the strange certainty that someone unseen kept watch over the ruins. By 1927, nearly 4 decades after Marshal Benjamin Trask first stepped off the stagecoach into Redstone Creek, his name had become shorthand in Nevada for duty that outlived death. The state's law academy in Reno occasionally mentioned him in lectures on frontier justice, a cautionary tale of loneliness and law. One such lecture, delivered by retired officer Captain James Havelock, framed the story as both lesson and legend. A badge may anchor a man to more than the law. It may hold him to the soil itself. The remark, though poetic, summarized the public's uneasy fascination with Redstone's missing Marshal. That same year, journalist Miriam Kay of the Reno Sentinel decided to revisit the site for a centennial feature on Nevada's forgotten towns. Her article draft, preserved in carbon copy, reveals an approach halfway between investigator and storyteller. She reached the valley on a bright October morning, finding the land strangely preserved, sunlight stark against pale sand, the air unmoving. No birdsong, no insect hum, she wrote, only the faint crackle of stone warming under daylight. She noted remnants of the jail foundation and fragments of iron rails half swallowed by dust. Near what had been the creek, she uncovered a fragment of glass-tinted amber, its curvature matching an old oil lamp chimney. As Kay explored, she claimed to feel the temperature drop. Her description is careful. The air cooled as though shaded by passing cloud, yet the sky was clear. Then faintly, she heard what she described as a measured tread, 2 steps, pause, 2 steps again. When she turned, the sound ceased. She left the valley before sunset, shaken but determined to remain objective. Her article, published later that month under the headline "The Marshal Still Walks," stirred brief public interest before being overshadowed by national news. Still, readers remembered the eerie precision of her tone. Historians reviewing her notes decades later found they matched earlier testimonies almost word for word. The silence, the smell of oil, the faint metallic rhythm. Even skeptics admitted the consistency was difficult to dismiss. Cross-referencing with similar incidents catalogued in the history of Nevada, they observed that Redstone Creek held the rare distinction of continuous witness reports spanning over 30 years, a rarity for isolated frontier sites. After Kay's visit, Redstone Valley was briefly surveyed for mineral potential, but the project halted within weeks. Workers complained of unease, equipment misfires, and sudden gusts that extinguished lamps in perfect sequence, as though someone walked past each one. The foreman's log mentions this curiously formal note, "Light checks complete, end patrol." The handwriting matched none of the crew. By winter's end, the desert reclaimed what little evidence remained. The road crews sealed the entrance, covering the gulch with gravel to prevent collapse. Yet even then, passing travelers told of hearing faint ringing beneath the tires, like a spur brushing stone. Old-timers took it as a sign that the Marshal's patrol continued, shiftless, tireless, bound to the route he once walked with lantern in hand. When asked years later if she believed what she'd heard, Miriam Kay replied in an interview, "Belief isn't the word. It was presence, something steady, patient, and unfinished." Those who read her words felt the same chill her editor described upon first opening the manuscript, as if the story itself carried an echo of boots pacing somewhere just beyond the paper's edge. By 1929, the legend of Redstone Creek seemed ready to fade entirely, but a drought that year exposed sections of the old creek bed unseen for decades. A team of hydrologists from Carson Water Bureau, led by Dr. Milton Avery, arrived to record measurements and collect sediment samples. Their official survey remains archived with other early environmental studies, though one appendix, marked Private Field Notes, contains an unsettling account. Avery wrote, "No vegetation near former jail site. Compass erratic. Crew reports steady vibration beneath ground, rhythmic as walking." His assistant confirmed the phenomenon but dismissed it as distant mining activity. Yet no mine within 50 miles was operational. Over several days, Avery's crew uncovered remnants of the former town. Brick fragments, melted glass, her corroded nameplate reading Office of the Marshal. Beneath it lay a shallow depression filled with fine grey dust, metallic in scent. He recorded this carefully, adding, "Composition resembles burned ash, not soil." The team preserved a sample, but the jar cracked on the return trip to Carson, releasing its contents. Inside the packing crate, a faint outline remained, like a handprint pressed into soot. The Nevada Historical Society learned of these findings and dispatched a representative, Miss Adeline Frost, to examine the site. Her diary, preserved in brittle leather, recounts a moment that chilled even her pragmatic tone. Stood alone at dusk, where creek once ran dry. Felt distinct sense of being observed. Light wind, yet heard no leaves move. She described the sensation as neither fear nor imagination, but a kind of waiting, as though the place itself expected acknowledgement. Later, Frost referenced earlier records and the familiar anecdotes drawn from the history of Nevada, remarking how Redstone Creek stood apart in its persistence, an event refused by both time and forgetting. During her brief stay, Frost gathered fragments of written testimony from nearby ranches. One, Eldred Vance, claimed that his grandfather had seen the Marshal's badge once shining in dust after a thunderstorm. "He picked it up," Vance said, "but the metal was cold as stone, and when he blinked, it was gone." Frost added no commentary, merely noting, "Statement consistent with past reports of reflective object near ridge." The hydrologists completed their work and left, though Avery later confided to colleagues that one night he woke to the sound of water trickling despite the dry season. When he stepped outside, he saw a faint glow along the creek line like oil catching lamplight. "I thought it must be moonlight," he wrote, "until I noticed the moon was behind the ridge." His companions heard nothing, yet found his boots wet with black residue. As the drought deepened, the valley emptied again. Redstone's ground cracked and whitened, resembling parchment, the patterns of its fissures strangely ordered, parallel lines that some said looked like boot tracks fading into distance. Geologists dismissed this as coincidence, yet photographs show the alignment clearly, as if some unseen rhythm had scored the earth. By year's end, the Bureau sealed its files and the story returned to dormancy. But Frost, before retiring, published a short reflection in a regional paper. Not all histories close neatly. Some patrol their own borders, forever ensuring we do not forget them. For the few who remembered Redstone Creek, those words felt less metaphor than warning. The 1930s opened with Nevada transforming. Roads widened, towns modernized, and electricity crept into even the loneliest valleys. Yet Redstone Creek remained untouched, a scar of land bypassed by progress. In 1931, as the Hoover Dam project drew workers across the state, a few of those men took weekend trips into the desert, curious about the old legends. One such group, led by foreman Lewis Pike, made camp near the former mine. Pike's surviving notebook, recovered later from his grandson, describes a peculiar night. Wind rose steady. Fire burned low, heard metallic drag like spur on gravel. Men laughed at it till one lantern toppled over without cause. The men stayed only 2 nights. On their second evening, Pike recorded an incident difficult to reconcile. Roll call at dusk. All present. At dawn found second tent empty but unzipped. Bedroll called. Minutes later, man reappeared walking from ridge, dazed. Said he'd been searching for campfire he could see but never reach. They broke camp immediately. The foreman ended his account with the sentence, "Will not return." Place is awake. Around the same time, Nevada newspapers began reprinting frontier retrospectives to celebrate statehood anniversaries. In one feature titled "The Vanished Lawman of Redstone," historian Clara Doyle, now an established author, revisited her earlier academic paper. She quoted passages from the history of Nevada describing how law and geography conspired to erase entire settlements, leaving only recollection. Doyle acknowledged skepticism but added, "The Trask case differs by its continuity. Even 30 years on, testimonies converge on identical detail." Her balanced tone lent the story credibility, and letters from readers soon followed. One, signed only "A Rider from Tonopah," claimed to have glimpsed a figure with a star upon his chest during a storm, lanterns swinging in perfect rhythm with the thunder. In 1933, a flash flood swept through the valley, uncovering new debris. County inspectors dispatched to assess erosion found remnants of metal, hinges, nails, and what one deputy swore was the outline of a revolver grip fossilized in silt. The team gathered samples but refused to stay after dark. Their lead, Deputy Marlon Fitch, noted an odor like lamp oil and rain-soaked ash. Within a week, every metal fragment collected had tarnished black. Reports of that period show a strange resurgence of folklore among construction crews and drifters. The site became a dare. Young men from nearby camps would travel there to test their nerve, swearing they heard a measured tread approaching before dawn. A rumor spread that if one placed a lantern at the dry creek and waited, a shadow would move to claim it. Newspapers mocked these tales, but the consistency of details again echoed those early reports preserved in the history of Nevada: the silence, the rhythm, the faint metallic tone. By mid-decade, the state cordoned off Redstone Creek as part of a geological reserve. Officially, it was to prevent looting of historical artifacts. Unofficially, locals said it was to let the Marshal keep his route. The boundary stones erected that year still stand, marking a zone where no settlement followed. Travelers say the air there feels heavy, as if weighted by invisible watchfulness. When dusk falls across the ridge, the wind dips low and steady, carrying what some insist are the echoes of boots pacing the dust, unhurried, dutiful, and unwilling to stop. By 1935, Redstone Creek had become a forbidden curiosity, fenced off but never forgotten. The state's preservation board listed it as a non-access heritage zone, yet hikers and wanderers still found ways through. That autumn, a photographer named Gideon Lark ventured there with a bulky field camera, hoping to capture the last ghost town untouched by progress. His negatives, later developed in Reno, produced one frame the newspapers dubbed the Empty Watch. It shows the sun setting over the ridge, long shadows crossing the dried creek, yet within the frame, faintly visible, stands a human silhouette at the far right edge. The exposure records no face, only the line of a coat and the glint of what appears to be a badge. Experts examined the plate for damage or double exposure, but found none. Lark, unnerved, retired from photography soon after, claiming that when he took the picture, no one else was there. The publication of the Empty Watch rekindled old discussions. Letters to editors across the state debated whether it was a trick of light or proof that the Marshal's patrol still continued. One veteran of the early highway crew wrote, "That ridge keeps its shape because something still walks it. The sand moves, but the pattern of prints never does." Scholars attempted to calm speculation, but even they found the image difficult to explain. Dr. Clara Doyle, then nearing retirement, analyzed the negative under magnification. She observed the reflection where the badge should be, remarking it caught the same hue as oil in lamplight. Her closing essay, published in Frontier Review, noted that such continuity of narrative was rare and referenced the history of Nevada for context. Few stories persist across half a century without alteration, except those anchored by shared experience. That winter, storms swept through the valley, erasing new tire tracks and collapsing what little remained of the jail foundation. Our state survey the following spring found the land perfectly level, as if smoothed by deliberate hand. Yet one anomaly appeared, a narrow channel of compacted soil 10 inches wide, tracing a path from the former jail site to the dry creek and looping back again. Measurements showed exact spacing between indentations, matching the stride of a tall adult male. The pattern ended abruptly beside a half-buried rock. Beneath it, inspectors found an old brass nameplate worn smooth by years of grit. In their report, they logged the find but offered no theory. Possible artifact from early settlement period, it read, returned to ground to prevent removal. One inspector, Warren Liddell, later confessed privately that he'd heard tapping behind him while writing that note. Like someone waiting, he told a colleague. Just enough to make you write faster. By 1937, Redstone Creek had been fully consumed by sage and silence. Travelers heading south passed it unknowingly, unaware that beneath their tires lay the remnants of a town, a desk, a glove, and a man whose name had become part of the dust itself. The last state document concerning the site closed with a line both factual and strangely elegiac. Patrol concluded, no further maintenance required. Yet among old ranchers and surveyors, a quieter belief endured that the phrase was mistaken. They said the patrol had never concluded at all. It merely continued unseen, a steady rhythm beneath the desert floor, boots tracing the same faithful path through time's indifferent silence. By 1938, the desert began reclaiming what little memory humans had left behind. The fences around Redstone Creek collapsed under storms, and official signs bleached pale until only faint lettering remained. Still wanderers came, historians, treasure seekers, drifters drawn by whispers of the Marshal's route. One of them was Elias Morton, a field ethnographer, documenting dying folklore for the Nevada Cultural Records Project. He arrived that March, carrying a phonograph recorder and notebooks filled with local legends. His mission, to capture voices of old ranchers before their stories vanished. Among them, every third man mentioned Redstone Creek. Morton's report survives intact, a precise yet uneasy chronicle of his brief stay. He reached the valley at dusk. The air was utterly motionless, he wrote, and the silence so dense it felt like glass. Setting up his camp near the ridge, he recorded ambient sounds for baseline measurement, wind, gravel crunch, distant birds. Yet playback later revealed something additional. Between the pauses, faint metallic clicks repeating at steady intervals. Believing it a defect, Morton replayed the wax cylinder through headphones and froze. The pattern wasn't random. It matched cadence. 12 beats, pause, 12 again. When transcribed, they formed what he described as a slow, deliberate footfall, booted, pacing in a loop. The following day, he found traces of old foundations where the jail once stood. Near them lay a curved glass fragment and a rusted clasp, possibly from a belt. He photographed everything, noting the soil's curious smoothness, as if polished by years of gentle friction. Later that afternoon, as he documented the dry creek, Morton observed an indentation forming in the dust ahead of him, as though something heavy had stepped there. No sound accompanied it. "I know what wind looks like," he wrote, and this was not wind. He returned to Carson with his recordings. Laboratory technicians examined the cylinders and verified the mechanical consistency. No double exposure, no surface flaw. One researcher, Dr. Fenton Harrow, suggested it might capture seismic reverberation from underground gas movement. Yet he admitted privately that the pattern was too human to be geological. The department published no formal report, though Harrow later referenced the phenomenon in a lecture comparing ghost acoustics to frontier superstitions, citing the history of Nevada to illustrate how such myths often grew from real phenomena misunderstood by isolation. Months later, Morton received an anonymous letter, postmarked from Reno, containing only a strip of weathered brass etched faintly with the letters BT, and a short note, returned as found. Investigators traced no sender. Morton kept the brass sealed in his archives, where it remains catalogued today under Artifact 14R, Unknown Provenance, Redstone District. Before leaving the project, Morton wrote one final observation in his log. It is not noise one hears in Redstone, but attention, the sense that something listens back. His words captured what generations had felt yet failed to define. Not fear, but recognition, the quiet vigilance of a presence bound to unfinished duty. By the year's end, Redstone Creek disappeared again beneath layers of wind-blown dust, its outlines erased yet its legend unbroken. Travelers crossing the valley after sunset claimed their radios faltered at the same mile marker, always between 12 clicks of static and silence. The Marshal's rhythm, some said, had found a new medium through which to walk. When 1939 arrived, Nevada stood on the brink of modernity. Airstrips rising, telegraph lines replaced by telephone cables, but in the quiet expanses beyond the highways, the past lingered. Redstone Creek, though unmarked, continued to cast a long shadow in memory. That spring, Professor Edwin Mallory's old papers were rediscovered during a university inventory. Among them lay the fragment of his unfinished essay about Marshal Trask. The final sentence ended mid-thought. Law is not merely an oath, but a tether. The rediscovery prompted a small symposium at the University of Nevada, where historians, geologists, and folklorists gathered to re-examine the Redstone mystery. At the event, Dr. Clara Doyle, now frail but still sharp, presented what would be her last lecture. Her talk bridged scholarship and haunting reminiscence. She recalled how every investigator, from Collins to Morton, had documented the same sequence: silence, scent of oil, metallic rhythm, then absence. Such repetition, she said, suggests not fantasy, but persistence, a pattern perhaps of memory itself. She referenced entries from the History of Nevada, noting that Redstone Creek stood alone as the state's longest unresolved case, with uninterrupted witness continuity. It's not just legend, she concluded softly. It's endurance. Newspapers covering the symposium gave the story brief attention, describing it as an intersection of folklore and fact. Yet within weeks, reports surfaced that highway workers restoring a nearby route had found traces of old timbers near the ridge, perfectly aligned as though forming the base of a walkway. When disturbed, the ground released a faint metallic odor and a patch of oil sheen that burned blue under sunlight. The foreman ordered the section reburied, muttering that the land doesn't like to be opened twice. A young journalist named Howard Greaves attended that excavation. His later column, The Marshal's Route Unearthed, summarized both the discovery and its eerie familiarity. Standing over the exposed beams, he wrote, one feels as though stepping into a paused conversation. He claimed that the oil residue shimmered in circular patterns, like ripples from unseen footsteps. Skeptics dismissed the effect as heat distortion, but readers sensed otherwise. Letters flooded the paper for weeks, some from old miners, others from families of those who'd vanished near the region, all convinced the Marshal's watch remained unbroken. That summer, drought struck again, baking the ground into hard ridges. A pilot flying low over the valley reported seeing faint parallel lines across the sand, like rails laid in dust. He photographed them. The image revealed two evenly spaced tracks, curving in a loop before fading at the creek's bend. The pattern matched earlier measurements of Trask's patrol stride. Officials chalked it up to erosion symmetry, yet whispers spread quickly. People said it wasn't the land remembering, but the law itself. In the autumn months, lightning storms rolled through the desert, illuminating the ridge in flashes. A rancher traveling from Tonopah later swore he saw a single figure standing atop the hill, coat flapping in wind, motionless against the light. Didn't move once, he told a reporter, but I swear I saw the badge glint before the dark came back. By year's end, the symposium notes and new sightings renewed debate, but the file closed again quietly. No resolution, no body, only a lineage of witnesses tracing back to that first vanished man. And as Nevada crossed into another decade, Redstone Creek settled once more beneath its curtain of dust, its unseen watchman still keeping time. Winter settled early across the Nevada basin in 1940, draping the land in a dry metallic chill. Snow rarely touched the Redstone Creek Valley. It remained barren, its silence more complete than ever. The last living witness to the original case, Eleanor Harrigan, then 84, gave one final interview to a Reno newspaper before her passing. She spoke softly, her recollections clear despite age. He wasn't the kind of man to run. If he's still out there, he's only doing what he swore to do. Her words closed the article, becoming the last first-hand voice of Redstone's beginning. After her death, local historians gathered the remaining artifacts: the glove, Collins' ledgers, the broken lamp glass, the tarnished buckle, and placed them in a single wooden chest labelled Case of Marshal B. Trask, 1889. The chest was sealed and stored in the Carson City archive. Weeks later, the curator noticed something peculiar. Condensation inside the glass display, faint streaks forming in even intervals from top to bottom, 12 marks in total. He wiped them away only to find them reappear the next morning. His report, though written plainly, ends on an uncertain note. Pattern reoccurs nightly. Maybe moisture reacting to temperature change, or other cause unknown. In the decades that followed, visitors to the museum occasionally claimed odd experiences near that exhibit. Some said the air felt heavier there. Others thought they caught the faint smell of burnt oil. A few swore that when the lights dimmed at closing hour, a dull glint appeared on the buckle, just where a star's edge would be. None of these accounts entered official record, yet the staff learned to lock the cabinet early, avoiding late-night maintenance. Scholars revisiting the story in later publications continued to draw from the same foundation: the county ledgers, the press clippings, the testimonies, and especially the entries connected through the history of Nevada. They framed Trask's case as both historical and psychological evidence of how frontier law carved itself into the land. Every state has its ghosts, one writer remarked, but Nevada's wear badges. Even now, historians debate whether the Redstone mystery represents human endurance, shared delusion, or something less easily dismissed, a loop of duty too deeply sworn to die. The last verifiable entry in the Carson archive concerning Redstone Creek appears in 1940's annual report. Its closing sentence mirrors the one penned half a century earlier by Justice Collins, as if deliberately echoing across time. Patrol continues, no disturbance reported. Beneath that line, faint pencil marks trace the initials BT, neither explained nor erased. And so the story closes where it began, beneath Nevada's endless horizon. The mine is gone, the town erased, the desk rotted to splinters. Yet each generation that passes through the valley speaks of the same rhythm. Bootsteps in even cadence, a soft metallic echo that seems to circle the dry creek once before fading into wind. Perhaps it is nothing but the shifting of stone. Perhaps it is memory taking form. But those who pause there after dusk swear they feel the presence of a man who still walks his beat, bound not by life or legend, but by the simple, enduring weight of his oath.